Hello and welcome to this video about SOAR. SOAR is a technique that you can use in competency-based interviews when you're asked a question such as, can you give me an example of when? Competency-based questions allow the interviewer to focus on specific skills that they might want to test that you have for the job role, but also to look at how you deal with answering questions in full. So are you able to present a range of information and problem solve pretty much? It's a well-used technique. It's used widely within the public sector, even in internal interviews, so it is a good technique to use. It gives interviewers the option to hear answers from candidates other than, I'm very organised, I'm very efficient, and I am a perfectionist. If they use competency-based questions, then it allows them to explore specific skills and specific scenarios, which will often provide more information as to a candidate's suitability than somebody who has just learned a list of skills that they think perhaps might be relevant for the job. Competency-related questions will tend to focus on specific areas such as team working, problem solving, conflict resolution, leadership, team management, handling difficult situations, diversity and inclusion. You will often be asked to explain the scenario in which you were involved and how you dealt with that situation, which is why using the SOAR technique is particularly useful. So what is SOAR? To look at that, I'm just going to show you a quick PowerPoint presentation. So let's just share the screen. So here we go with our overview of SOAR. So first of all, you have S, which is the situation or scenario. Then you have O, which is your objective or the obstacle you faced. Then you have A, which is for action. And then you have R, which is for results. Now, there are some people who use STAR, where they replace the O with a T, and T is the task. However, I use STAR in relation to action planning and goal setting. So in order to avoid any confusion, we're going to stick with SOAR, situation, objective, action, results. So with the situation, you want to start off by answering the question with an explanation around what the situation was. What was the problem that you had and how did you deal with it? Why was it a problem, if indeed it was actually a problem? And how is this relevant to the question? So you need to make sure that when they ask you the question, you are explaining how this situation fits the question that they've asked. For example, if they ask you a question about team working, you're not going to want to give a situation where you were working by yourself. So by explaining that you were in a team working situation, this explains to them that you are answering their question. With the objective or the obstacle, you need to explain the obstacle that you are facing. You need to explain how this relates to the question, and you need to explain what it is that you need to do. When it comes to the action, this is the easiest part of answering the question for most people. You need to avoid using we as much as you can, especially if the question is related to leadership or management. What you need to explain is how you addressed the situation that you explained at the start. Once you have done this, you then move on to your results. What was the result of what you did? Did you achieve your objective? What would have happened if you didn't act? And is there anything that you did well or could have improved? This will refer back to your original objective in answering the question. If we use this model to think about a particular example, just so that you can see how it works, if we think about conflict resolution, for example, if you were asked, please explain an example of when you dealt with conflict, you would start off by explaining the situation. Whilst I was babysitting for my next door neighbour's children, they started arguing over a bottle of juice. Now you've explained the situation, you want to move on to explaining the objective. I needed to resolve the conflict in order to stop the situation escalating. I didn't want them to become upset or violent. So now we have our situation and our objective, we need to explain what we did. So I started by asking each of them if they would be willing to share the bottle of juice. Both of them were crying at this point and were determined that they were going to take the whole bottle of juice. Neither of them was willing to share. I then asked them what they wanted the juice for. The boy said that he was thirsty and he wanted to drink the juice. When I asked the girl what she wanted it for, she said she wanted the bottle in order to make a space rocket. This allowed me to resolve the situation by taking the juice out of the bottle and putting it in a cup for the boy so that he could drink the juice, and that left the empty bottle for the girl to have in order to make her space rocket. Now you've explained what you did, you can now explain what the results were. As a result of my intervention, the children were both happy. The boy was no longer thirsty or upset because he had a drink of juice, and the girl was no longer upset because she had the empty bottle to make into her space rocket. If I hadn't have intervened, potentially they might have ended up getting cross with each other, they might have started shouting or potentially hitting each other. So I was able to diffuse the situation by talking to both of them and understanding what it was that they wanted and acting on it. This is a really simplistic model. Of course, if you're talking about work-based scenarios, then you're probably going to have slightly more complex scenarios to talk about, but it's just a little illustration around how you can use SOAR in competency-based interview questions. If you know that your interview is going to involve competency-based questions, it is always a good idea to plan in advance. You should be able to tell from the role profile or the application questions that you are asked what the sort of competencies they are going to be talking about. For example, you know that you're not going to get asked management or leadership questions if the position isn't a management or a leadership role. If you are going for a management role, then you should expect examples of leading a team or dealing with conflict or staff members who are underperforming. So use the role profile, and if you had competency-based questions in your application form, to give you an idea of the types of competencies that they're going to be looking for. In some situations, they will actually tell you what the competencies are that you need to meet. You then need to sit down and think about maybe 5 or 6, 7 different scenarios that you can use for your interview. Now, you might find that you have a scenario which you can actually use interchangeably depending on the question that you get used. You might find that one answer will actually answer maybe 2 or 3 competency questions. Now, obviously, you're only going to use it once in the interview, so you need to pick the right answer for the question. And it's happened to me before. I've been asked a question, I've used my answer, and then later on in the interview they've asked me another question, and actually the answer that I've already used for another competency would have fitted better into that question. But there's nothing you can do, you just need to adapt and think on your feet. That's why it's really important to prepare. So you need to think about all the different competencies that you need to meet. You need to think about the relevant examples that you have that you can use. You need to map out the SOAR for all of those and learn them, so that once you're in your interview, you're not stressed about thinking what answers you're going to need to give, you're not umming and erring, you're not stuttering or frozen, you actually have the answers prepared. And you will find that if you are prepared with a suite of answers to questions, that you are much more relaxed, you answer much more confidently, and you just come across a lot better in the interview. So think about your examples in advance. Map out each of the 4 steps for SOAR so that you prepare that answer so that it will answer all of the objectives, and then learn them so that you know which questions you can answer, which answers you're going to use, and which questions they can meet. If you have any questions about that, or you have any further tips, then please feel free to share in the comments below. Otherwise, I will see you soon.